The morning sun cast long shadows across the brick pathways of Westfield University as Sophia Reyes dragged her suitcase toward the dormitories. Unlike the other students whose parents helped carry mini fridges and decorative pillows, Sophia traveled light. One suitcase of clothes, a backpack of textbooks, and a portable keyboard wrapped carefully in her grandmother's quilt. She paused to catch her breath, taking in the sprawling campus with its ivy-covered buildings and century-old oak trees. Students bustled around her, laughing and hugging friends they hadn't seen all summer. Sophia clutched the acceptance letter in her pocket, still hardly believing she'd made it here on a partial scholarship. The remaining tuition had emptied her savings account, leaving nothing for extras like the stack of textbooks on her required list. Need directions? A friendly voice broke through her thoughts. A tall girl with bright blue-tipped hair smiled at her. "I'm heading to Monroe Hall," Sophia said, returning the smile though her stomach knotted with anxiety. "Same dorm as me. I'm Priya." She pointed toward a red brick building at the end of the path. "Fair warning, the elevator's been broken since last semester." By the time Sophia had unpacked her few belongings and met her roommate, a pre-med student who'd decorated her side of the room with color-coded schedules, the worries she'd pushed aside began flooding back. The campus bookstore's prices had shocked her. Even used textbooks would cost more than she had left in her account. That night, while her roommate slept, Sophia sat by the window, staring at the quiet campus below. She opened her phone to check her bank balance again, as if the numbers might somehow change. $127.53, barely enough for 2 textbooks, let alone the 6 she needed by Monday. Her fingers absently traced the edges of her keyboard case leaning against the wall. Music had always been her refuge, her passion. Before everything fell apart at home, she'd been accepted to the prestigious Richardson Conservatory. Those dreams had evaporated when her father got sick, and the family savings went to medical bills instead of tuition. Sophia gently unzipped the case and lifted out the keyboard, plugging in headphones so she wouldn't disturb anyone. As her fingers moved across the keys, playing a piece she'd composed during those long nights in hospital waiting rooms, an idea began forming. The next morning, Sophia woke early and slipped out with her keyboard while her roommate still slept. She'd noticed a small courtyard yesterday near the science buildings, a peaceful spot with benches where students gathered between classes. Setting up near a tree, she positioned her small tip jar, actually an empty coffee cup, and began to play. The first notes seemed to hang in the morning air, tentative and questioning. A few early students glanced curiously in her direction but continued walking. Sophia closed her eyes and leaned into the music, letting the melody grow more confident. She transitioned from classical pieces into modern songs that students might recognize, adding her own flourishes and interpretations. By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered. Some students sat on nearby benches, sipping coffee and nodding along to the music. Others dropped dollar bills and coins into her cup before rushing off to class. When Sophia finally took a break after 2 hours, she counted nearly $40, a start toward those textbooks. "That was beautiful," said an older man with silver-streaked hair, approaching as Sophia packed up. Her heart sank, expecting to be told she couldn't play here. "I haven't heard an interpretation of that Chopin piece quite like that before." "Thank you," Sophia replied cautiously. "I'm just trying to earn a little extra for textbooks. I'm Professor Langdon, Music Department." He handed her a business card. "We have practice rooms in the arts building that you're welcome to use." "Much better than sitting outside," Sophia shook her head. "I appreciate that, but I need the, you know." She gestured toward the cup of money. Understanding softened his eyes. "Of course. Well, the offer stands." He paused. "How long have you been playing?" "Since I was 6, Sophia replied, the familiar pang of lost opportunities washing over her. "I was supposed to attend Richardson before. Life happened." Professor Langdon raised his eyebrows. "Richardson doesn't accept just anyone. You must be quite talented." She shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm just trying to get through school now." "Well, you've certainly brightened my morning. I look forward to hearing you play again." With a nod, he continued toward the science building. Sophia returned the next day and the day after that. Word spread about the courtyard pianist, and students began timing their breaks around her playing schedule. Biology majors sat alongside English literature students, engineering students next to art majors. Barriers between different social groups temporarily dissolved by the music. By the end of the week, Sophia had earned enough for her textbooks and a little extra. More importantly, she'd found something she hadn't expected, a sense of belonging. One afternoon, she played a piece she'd composed herself, a melancholy melody that transformed slowly into something hopeful. When she finished, a girl with tear-streaked cheeks approached her. "I failed my chemistry midterm this morning," she explained, wiping her eyes. "I was having the worst day ever until I heard you playing. Something about that song. It just helped." Similar stories began finding their way to Sophia, a stressed-out pre-law student who found calm listening between classes. A homesick freshman who said the music reminded him of his grandmother's house. A professor who changed her walking route to pass by the courtyard each day. Professor Langdon became a regular listener, sometimes staying for entire sessions. After 2 weeks, he approached Sophia again as she counted her tips. "Have you thought about performing at the campus coffee shop? They pay student musicians on Friday nights." Sophia looked up in surprise. "They do? I've already mentioned you to the manager. She's interested." He hesitated. "And I've been wondering if you'd consider taking one of my advanced composition classes. I could arrange a fee waiver." Sophia felt a spark of the old passion she'd tried so hard to bury after deferring her conservatory dreams. I'd really like that." As September stretched into October, the courtyard became Sophia's stage. Students brought friends to hear her play. Couples sat holding hands, listening to romantic pieces. Groups of freshmen gathered on the lawn, doing homework to the backdrop of her music. One quiet afternoon, Sophia noticed something new. Students from different groups who'd begun as strangers at her performances were now sitting together, talking and laughing like old friends. Music majors chatted with engineering students. Athletes shared notes with art students. Her little corner of campus had become a place where the usual social boundaries seemed to fade away. A shy computer science student named Raj began bringing his guitar, and sometimes they played duets. A dance major spontaneously performed to Sophia's rendition of a classical piece, drawing applause from onlookers. The courtyard had transformed from just another campus space into something special, a community forming note by note. What Sophia didn't realize was how much attention her impromptu concerts were attracting. Professor Langdon had mentioned her talents to colleagues. Students recorded snippets of her performances, sharing them on campus social media. Her music was weaving itself into the daily rhythm of university life. She also didn't notice the occasional frowns from certain faculty members passing by, particularly those whose classroom windows faced the courtyard, or the complaints about noise beginning to reach administrative offices, or how the growing crowds sometimes blocked pathways between buildings. Sophia was too busy, experiencing something she thought she'd lost forever. The joy of sharing her music with people who truly appreciated it. For the first time since arriving at Westfield University, she felt like she belonged. Like she had something valuable to contribute beyond struggling through classes and working part-time at the cafeteria. As October's leaves began turning golden, Sophia settled into a routine. Her keyboard case now decorated with stickers given by regular listeners, her repertoire expanding based on requests. The tip jar was no longer for textbooks but for saving toward a better keyboard, one worthy of the music she felt growing inside her. On a particularly beautiful autumn afternoon, with more listeners than ever spread across the courtyard, Sophia failed to notice a stern-faced man observing from the administrative building window, making notes on his tablet with quick, angry taps. Dean Harrison had received his third formal complaint about disruption to classes, and he had strict policies about unauthorized performances on university property. The sun was setting as Sophia played her final piece for the day, unaware that by tomorrow everything would change. Sophia woke to sunshine streaming through the dorm window, feeling more rested than she had in weeks. Yesterday's courtyard session had been her best yet. Nearly $70 in tips and a crowd so large that people had stood 3 deep around the benches. She'd even been invited to play at an off-campus coffee shop on weekends, which meant steady income if it worked out. As she got ready for her morning class, her phone buzzed with a text from Raj, "Heading to courtyard early to save our spot. Professor Chen brought her entire music theory class yesterday." Sophia smiled, tucking her phone away. The courtyard performances had become more than just a way to earn money. They were the highlight of her day. Even her grades were improving as the constant stress about finances eased. She was halfway across. campus keyboard slung over her shoulder, when she noticed the paper taped to a lamppost, then another on a tree. By the time she reached the courtyard, her stomach had knotted into a tight ball. Notice: unauthorized solicitation and performances on university grounds are prohibited. Violators subject to disciplinary action. The notices were everywhere, stark black text on bright yellow paper. Raj stood in their usual spot, his guitar case unopened, looking worried. "What happened?" Sophia asked, though the knot in her stomach told her she already knew. "Campus security came by earlier," he explained. "Said there's been complaints. We need permission for any kind of performance or money collection." He lowered his voice. "They mentioned you specifically." Sophia felt her cheeks burn. "But we're not bothering anyone. People love the music." "Not everyone, apparently." Raj nodded toward the science building. Professor Wilson complained that he can't teach with music floating through his window, and Dean Harrison's office overlooks the courtyard. Dean Harrison. Everyone knew the name. He'd been featured in the student newspaper's welcome issue, a tall, imposing figure with steel-rimmed glasses and a reputation for strict enforcement of every university rule, no matter how small. "So that's it? We just stop?" The thought made her chest tight. "Maybe we could apply for permission," Raj suggested. "There must be a process." Sophia spent her morning classes distracted, half listening to lectures while researching university policies on her laptop. By lunchtime, she'd found the proper forms to request permission for campus activities. She filled them out between bites of her sandwich, planning to drop them off at the administration building that afternoon. The secretary at the administration office looked up from her computer when Sophia approached. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to submit these performance permission forms," Sophia said, sliding the papers across the desk. The secretary glanced at them. "These need to be submitted at least 3 weeks before any scheduled activity." 3 weeks? But I've been playing in the courtyard for over a month now with no problems, which is precisely the problem. The new voice came from behind her, deep and clipped. Sophia turned to find herself facing a tall man with perfectly pressed clothes and those infamous steel-rimmed glasses. "Dean Harrison. Miss Reyes, I presume." He didn't wait for confirmation. "My office. Now." The walk down the hallway felt endless. Sophia clutched her keyboard case like a shield as she followed the dean into a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking, of course, her courtyard. "Sit." He gestured to a chair while settling himself behind an imposingly large desk. Sophia perched on the edge of the seat, heart hammering. "Do you know how many complaints I've received about your unauthorized performances?" Dean Harrison asked, not looking up as he pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "No, sir." 17. He finally looked at her, eyes sharp. 7 from faculty members whose classes are disrupted by the noise. 5 from groundskeepers about the damage to the lawn from increased foot traffic. 3 from campus security about crowding and blocked pathways. And 2 from student organizations whose approved activities were overshadowed by your impromptu concerts. Sophia flinched at each count, but found her voice. "I didn't realize I was causing problems. Students seem to really enjoy." "What students enjoy and what is permitted by university regulations are often very different things," he interrupted. "Westfield University has clear policies about solicitation on campus grounds." "I wasn't soliciting exactly," Sophia ventured. "I was just playing music," with a tip jar prominently displayed. Dean Harrison's eyebrows rose. "Unless you're prepared to argue that the coffee cup full of dollar bills was merely decorative." Heat crept up Sophia's neck. "I needed money for textbooks. There are proper channels for students facing financial difficulties. Unauthorized performance for profit is not one of them." He closed the folder with a snap. "Additionally, you've been operating without noise permits, event insurance, or safety clearances." "Insurance? For playing a keyboard?" The words slipped out before Sophia could stop them. The dean's expression hardened. "Your performances have drawn crowds of over 100 people to an area designed for perhaps 30. That creates liability issues for the university." "I had no idea it would get so popular," Sophia said, her voice smaller now. "It started with just a few students. Regardless of how it started, It ends today. Dean Harrison slid a document across the desk. This is an official notice prohibiting your performances in any common area of the university. Violation will result in disciplinary action, potentially including suspension. Sophia stared at the paper, the words blurring as tears threatened. Everything she'd built over the past month, the extra income, the community, the return of music to her life, vanished in an instant. But what if I get the proper permissions? She asked, grasping at possibilities. Fill out the forms, wait the 3 weeks, Miss Reyes. Dean Harrison's tone was final. The courtyard is not designated as a performance space. No permission would be granted even if you applied correctly. He checked his watch. Now I have another meeting. I trust I've made myself clear. Sophia nodded mutely, clutching the prohibition notice. One more thing. Dean Harrison stood. University policy requires that we confiscate any equipment used in unauthorized activities. Sophia's head snapped up. What? Your keyboard. It was used in violation of university policy and must be held until the end of the semester. No. The word burst from her before she could stop it. Please, it's the only valuable thing I own. My grandmother gave it to me before she died. I need it for my composition class with Professor Langdon. Something flickered across Dean Harrison's face, perhaps surprise at the mention of a faculty member, but it vanished quickly. Professor Langdon's class has access to music department equipment. You'll make do. He pressed a button on his desk. Security will meet you outside to collect the instrument. 5 minutes later, Sophia stood empty-handed on the administration building steps, watching a campus security officer carry her keyboard away. The prohibition notice was crumpled in her fist, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Sophia? What happened? She turned to find Professor Langdon approaching, concern etched on his face. Through halting words and occasional sobs, Sophia explained the situation. The professor's expression darkened as she described the confiscation of her keyboard. That's excessive, he muttered. Harrison's always been a stickler, but this... He shook his head. Let me see what I can do. It's no use, Sophia said, wiping her eyes. He made it very clear the decision is final. We'll see about that. Professor Langdon's voice was gentle but determined. In the meantime, you can use the practice rooms whenever you like. The university can't prohibit you from playing music entirely. But it wasn't the same. Over the next few days, Sophia felt a hollowness that not even the private practice rooms could fill. Playing alone behind closed doors lacked the connection, the community she'd found in the courtyard. Word spread quickly about what had happened. Students who'd become regular listeners sought Sophia out to express support. Raj organized a small group to submit complaints about the prohibition, arguing that the performances enhanced campus life. We're planning a protest, Priya told Sophia over dinner in the cafeteria. Nothing big, just a gathering in the courtyard during what would have been your usual playing time. Don't, Sophia said quickly. You'll get in trouble too. It's not worth it. But despite her objections, something was happening across campus. Students who'd met during her performances continued to gather in the courtyard, sitting in unusual silence at first, then gradually beginning to talk about what her music had meant to them. A week after the confrontation, Sophia was working her cafeteria shift when she overheard a conversation at a nearby table. Did you hear what happened in Dr. Wilson's class today? A student was saying. Someone started humming that song, the one the keyboard girl always played to end her sessions. The sad one that gets happy at the end? Yeah. Anyway, one person started, then another joined in, and pretty soon half the class was humming it. Dr. Wilson was furious. Sophia nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. Her song, her composition was being remembered, shared, continued without her. Later that evening, she received an email from Professor Langdon requesting she come to his office the following morning. With a mix of hope and apprehension, Sophia wondered if he'd made any progress with Dean Harrison. What she couldn't know was that at that very moment, Dean Harrison stood at his office window, looking down at the courtyard where a group of students had gathered with small instruments, nothing requiring permits, just handheld drums and flutes, playing a melody that sounded strangely familiar. The same melody that had been hummed in 3 different classes that day. The same melody that, despite his best efforts to silence it, was beginning to echo throughout the entire campus. Professor Langdon's office was tucked away in the oldest building on campus, walls lined with vinyl records and vintage concert posters. Sophia arrived 5 minutes early, knocking softly on the half-open door. Come in, Professor Langdon called, waving her toward a chair. How are you holding up? Sophia shrugged, the weight of the past week evident in her slumped shoulders. I'm okay. Just focusing on classes and the music? He leaned forward, eyes kind but concerned. Are you still playing? In the practice room sometimes. Sophia stared at her hands. It's not the same. Professor Langdon nodded, understanding in his expression. I spoke with Dean Harrison about your keyboard. Sophia looked up hopefully. And the professor chose his words carefully. Unmoved at present. But I haven't given up. He reached for a folder on his desk. Actually, that's not why I asked you here. I've been doing some research about you. About me? Your application mentioned you'd been accepted to Richardson Conservatory before coming here. He opened the folder, revealing printouts of concert programs. What it didn't mention was that you were offered their most prestigious scholarship, or that you won 3 national young composer competitions before age 18. Heat rose to Sophia's cheeks. That was a different life. Your father's illness changed your path, Professor Langdon said gently. I'm sorry for your loss, Sophia's breath caught. She hadn't told anyone at Westfield about her father's death last year, about the medical bills that had drained their savings, about her mother working double shifts to keep their home. How did you? Richardson's music director is an old friend. I called to ask about you. The professor closed the folder. He said you were the most talented pianist he'd heard in a decade. Sophia looked away, the praise stirring painful memories of what might have been. Sophia, Professor Langdon continued, what happened with Dean Harrison isn't right. Your music brought something special to this campus. Students from different majors, different backgrounds, all connecting through your performances. It doesn't matter now, Sophia said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. I think it does. He leaned back in his chair, which is why I've spoken with someone at the Herald, the student newspaper. Sophia frowned. They're running a feature on how your music created community on campus and how that community is responding to the ban. Professor Langdon smiled. The reporter wants to interview you. I can't, Sophia said quickly. Dean Harrison would... Think carefully, Professor Langdon interrupted. This isn't just about your keyboard anymore. Something bigger is happening. Later that day, Sophia sat across from Lee, the features editor of the Herald, in a quiet corner of the library. Despite her reservations, Sophia found herself opening up about her journey, her early love for music, the scholarship opportunity lost to family tragedy, finding an unexpected community through playing at Westfield. What surprised me most, Sophia said, was how people connected with each other, not just the music. Engineering students started talking with art majors. Professors sat with freshmen. It was like the music made everyone forget the usual campus divisions. Lee nodded, typing rapidly. And now that Dean Harrison has banned your performances? Sophia hesitated, wary of saying anything that might make her situation worse. Off the record, Lee offered, pausing her typing. Sophia sighed. It feels like he took away more than just my keyboard. Like he doesn't understand what those gatherings meant to people. Lee's article appeared in the Herald 3 days later. The headline read, Silenced Melody, How One Student's Music Unified Campus. The story detailed Sophia's background, the impact of her courtyard performances, and the growing student response to the ban. Alongside it ran a companion piece about the university's policies on student expression and community building. The paper disappeared from campus stands within hours. By lunchtime, Sophia couldn't walk to class without students stopping to express support. Professors she'd never met nodded to her in hallways. Even the cafeteria manager slipped her an extra dessert during her shift. You've become a campus celebrity, Priya teased as they walked to the dorms that evening. Not in a good way, Sophia replied. Thinking of Dean Harrison. This attention is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Well, it's too late now, Priya grinned, pointing ahead where a small crowd had gathered in the courtyard. Look, at first Sophia thought it was just the usual evening crowd. Then she noticed they were arranged differently, seated in a semicircle facing outward. In the center stood Raj with his guitar and several students from the music department, holding various small instruments. As Sophia and Priya drew closer, they began to play, a familiar melody that made Sophia's heart catch. Her melody, the one she'd composed during those long hospital nights with her father. The one she always played to end her courtyard sessions. Students around the semicircle hummed along, some swaying gently. Others held small electric candles, creating a warm glow in the gathering dusk. When the musicians finished, the crowd dispersed quickly, as if they'd never been there at all. Flash performance, Priya explained, seeing Sophia's confusion. They organize on social media, gather for exactly 10 minutes, then disappear before security can cite them for an unauthorized gathering. They're doing this for me? Sophia whispered, eyes stinging with unexpected tears. For you, for themselves, for what your music started. Priya squeezed her shoulder. It's happening all over campus. Different spots, different times. They can ban your performances, but they can't stop your music from spreading. Over the next week, Sophia witnessed it firsthand. Walking to class, she heard her melody being whistled by a groundskeeper trimming hedges. During a study session in the library, a student at the next table quietly hummed it while highlighting notes. In the dining hall, someone had programmed it as a ringtone. The Herald ran follow-up stories about student reaction to the ban. Sophia's inbox filled with messages from people she'd never met, sharing what her courtyard performances had meant to them. Professor Langdon kept her updated on his efforts to recover her keyboard, though Dean Harrison remained firm in his decision. The administration views this as a matter of policy enforcement, he explained after another unsuccessful attempt. Not as the community issue it really is. Meanwhile, Sophia threw herself into her coursework, taking extra shifts at the cafeteria to save for a new keyboard. The practice room pianos were fine for class requirements, but she missed the freedom of having her own instrument. 3 weeks after the ban, Sophia was wiping down cafeteria tables when her phone buzzed with a text from Raj. They're doing another one. Main quad, 5 minutes. Sophia hesitated, then untied her apron. Taking my break, she called to her supervisor, who nodded knowingly. By the time she reached the main quadrangle, a crowd had already formed, larger than any she'd seen before. In the center stood not just Raj and the usual music students, but a full a cappella group. As Sophia watched from the edge of the gathering, they began a complex vocal arrangement of her melody, adding harmonies and counterpoints she'd never imagined. The performance lasted exactly 8 minutes before the singers scattered into the crowd, which dispersed in all directions as security arrived. Sophia slipped away with the others, a strange mix of pride and sadness filling her chest. That evening, a knock came at her dorm room door. Priya opened it to find a freshman Sophia recognized from the courtyard days. Sorry to bother you, the girl said nervously, but I'm writing an article for my journalism class about how music affects mental health on campus, and I was hoping to interview Sophia. Sophia came to the door, surprised. Your journalism class? Professor Chen's section, the girl explained. He suggested I talk to you after I mentioned the courtyard performances in our discussion about community building. Sophia invited her in, touched that faculty members other than Professor Langdon were taking an interest in what had happened. The interview questions focused on the emotional impact of music in shared spaces, how it had helped students deal with stress, and the sense of loss many felt when the performances stopped. One last question, the girl said as they finished. Would you consider teaching some of us your melody? The one everyone's sharing? We want to make sure we're playing it the way you intended. The question caught Sophia off guard. You want me to teach you? The girl nodded earnestly. A bunch of us meet in the East practice room on Thursdays. Nothing official, just students sharing music they've written. I don't know, Sophia hesitated. I'm not really a teacher, please. Your song is special to a lot of people now. It would mean so much to learn it from you. Something shifted in Sophia's perspective. If she couldn't perform her music in the courtyard, perhaps she could still share it this way, teaching others, watching it spread through their hands and voices. Okay, she agreed. This Thursday, what began as a simple teaching session grew into a weekly gathering. Students from across departments came to learn Sophia's compositions, asking questions about her techniques and inspirations. Those with musical backgrounds taught beginners. Those without simply came to listen and support. Professor Langdon stopped by one Thursday, leaning against the doorframe with a smile. "You've started something remarkable here, Sophia." She looked around the room where students huddled in small groups, helping each other master difficult passages, laughing at mistakes, celebrating small victories. "It's not the courtyard," she admitted. "No," the professor agreed. "It's something Dean Harrison can't shut down. Students teaching each other, sharing knowledge, building connections through music. In some ways, it's more powerful than your performances ever were." Sophia hadn't thought of it that way. "Do you think he knows?" Professor Langdon's eyes twinkled. "Oh, he knows. The whole campus knows." He straightened from the doorway. "Speaking of which, have you heard about the centennial celebration coming up? The university's 100th anniversary? It's all anyone's talking about." Sophia shrugged. "Big donor event, not really for students." "That's where you're wrong," Professor Langdon said. "The planning committee just announced student performances will be featured prominently. Seems someone convinced them it was important to showcase the authentic student experience at Westfield." He winked as he turned to leave. "Maybe you should consider submitting an application. Properly this time, with all the required permissions." Sophia watched him go, a small flame of hope flickering to life within her. Perhaps this wasn't the end of her story with Westfield after all, but merely the beginning of a new movement, one that would echo through the campus in ways Dean Harrison never anticipated. Dean Harrison rubbed his temples, trying to focus on the budget spreadsheet open on his computer. The growing headache wasn't from the numbers, though they were concerning enough. It was from the persistent melody drifting through his open window. Again. This time it came from somewhere near the library. Yesterday it had been by the student center. The day before, the science building steps. Always the same haunting melody that started melancholy and gradually transformed into something hopeful. He pushed back from his desk and walked to the window. A small group of students with various instruments had gathered on the library lawn. Not large enough to require a permit, not loud enough to disrupt classes, but unmistakably playing the band Pianist's signature piece. These pop-up performances were becoming a daily occurrence. His inbox filled with faculty complaints alongside an equal number of messages supporting the students. The situation was getting out of hand. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, returning to his desk. His assistant, Mrs. Chen, entered with a stack of papers. "The final arrangements for the centennial celebration need your approval." She placed them on his desk. "And the committee wanted to remind you about the performer situation." Dean Harrison frowned. "What situation?" "The pianist who was scheduled for the donor reception canceled yesterday. Family emergency. They need a replacement immediately." "That's the committee's concern, not mine," he said dismissively. "They've asked for recommendations." Mrs. Chen's expression remained neutral. "Preferably someone with ties to the university. Contact the music department. I'm sure Professor Langdon can suggest someone suitable." As she turned to leave, Mrs. Chen paused. "Oh, and this came for you." She placed a flash drive on his desk. "From the student newspaper. They're doing a piece on the centennial and requested archival photos from your office." After she left, Dean Harrison inserted the drive into his computer. Among the expected folders of historical photos was one labeled Current Campus Culture. Curious, he opened it to find dozens of video clips, all filmed on phones around campus over the past few weeks. Students humming the pianist's melody while studying in the library, a chemistry professor whistling it while setting up a lab experiment, the university choir incorporating it into their warm-up exercises, two strangers bonding over a guitar as one taught the other the finger positions for the song, the cafeteria staff tapping out the rhythm on counters as they worked. The final video made him pause. It showed Sophia Reyes in a practice room, surrounded by students from various departments. She wasn't performing but teaching, patiently showing others how to play her composition, explaining the emotions behind each section, laughing as they stumbled through difficult parts. "It's not about playing it perfectly." Her voice came clearly through his speakers. "It's about finding the feeling in the music and sharing it with others." Dean Harrison sat back, frowning. This wasn't what he'd expected. The Sophia Reyes in his office had been a rule breaker, a student who'd created disruption and liability issues with her unauthorized performances. The young woman in the video was a teacher, a mentor, bringing students together through music in a way that was entirely within university guidelines. A new email notification appeared on his screen, another message about the Pianist controversy. This one came from Dr. Patel in the psychology department, a respected senior faculty member. "I must express my concern about the handling of the student-musician situation," Dr. Patel wrote. "In my 20 years at Westfield, I've never seen anything unite our fractured campus community like these musical gatherings. My research on social cohesion and mental health in academic settings suggests that such organic community building is precisely what our students need. I urge administration to reconsider its position." Dean Harrison closed the email with a sigh. He'd been receiving similar messages for weeks, but had dismissed them as emotional reactions without merit. Now, watching the videos, he wondered if he'd misjudged the situation. His intercom buzzed. "Dean Harrison? Professor Langdon is here to see you. Send him in." The music professor entered, carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression of determination. "Professor," Dean Harrison greeted him, "if this is about Miss Reyes's keyboard again." "It's about the centennial performance," Langdon interrupted, taking the seat across from the desk without waiting for an invitation. "The committee asked for my recommendation for a replacement pianist. And I'm recommending Sophia Reyes." Dean Harrison nearly laughed. "Absolutely not. The girl who's been the center of this entire controversy? Who violated university policies? Who's inspired what amounts to musical protests across campus?" "The very same," Langdon agreed calmly. "Though I'd characterize what's happening as something more meaningful than protests." "Meaning?" Langdon opened his folder, pulling out student statements, faculty observations, and data charts. "I've been collecting information about the impact of Sophia's music on our campus. The results are remarkable." He spread the papers across the dean's desk. "Attendance at cross-departmental events is up 64% since her courtyard performances began. Students who met at her gatherings have formed study groups that show improved academic outcomes. The counseling center reports decreased anxiety and stress complaints during the weeks she was playing." "Correlation doesn't imply causation," Dean Harrison countered automatically, though he found himself leaning forward to examine the data. "True, but there's more." Langdon continued. "Sophia's background is extraordinary. She was Richardson Conservatory's top scholarship recipient before her father's illness forced her to decline. She's won multiple national competitions. Her performance would impress even our most discerning donors. If she's so talented, why is she here and not at a music school? Family tragedy. Medical bills. The real-world problems many of our students face." Langdon's voice softened. "That keyboard you confiscated? It was a gift from her grandmother before she died. It's quite literally her most precious possession." Something uncomfortable shifted in Dean Harrison's chest. He glanced at the video still playing silently on his monitor. Sophia guiding a struggling student's hands over piano keys. Her face lit with genuine joy at teaching. "Even if I were inclined to consider this," he said carefully, "the issue remains that she violated university policy. Making an exception sends the wrong message." "Does it?" Langdon asked. "Or does it show that Westfield is a place where rules serve people, not the other way around? Where we can recognize when something unexpected brings value to our community?" Dean Harrison's phone rang, saving him from answering immediately. "Excuse me," he said, picking up the receiver. "Yes?" His expression changed as he listened. "I see. No, don't cancel. I'll handle it personally. Thank you." He hung up and turned back to Langdon. "It seems we have another problem. The student committee organizing the Centennial's opening ceremony is insisting on featuring the Courtyard Melody, as they're calling it. They say it represents the true spirit of Westfield, better than the traditional university anthem." Langdon couldn't quite hide his smile. "The students have spoken." "This is getting out of hand," Dean Harrison muttered. "Or perhaps," Langdon suggested gently, "it's finally getting into the right hands." After Langdon left, Dean Harrison remained at his desk, the spreadsheets forgotten as he replayed the videos on the flash drive. One clip particularly caught his attention. A time-lapse of the courtyard during what would have been Sophia's performance time. Students still gathered there, sitting in the same configuration as before, but in silence. Some studied, others talked quietly, but the space remained a community gathering point even without the music. They'd created something that outlasted the performances themselves. connections that continued even after the melody stopped. It was exactly the kind of community building that Westfield's mission statement promoted, but that usually failed to materialize despite official programs designed to foster it. A nagging thought had been building in Dean Harrison's mind all day. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out Sophia's confiscated keyboard, still in its worn case. He'd intended to store it with campus security, but something had made him keep it here instead. He unzipped the case, revealing the instrument inside. It was older than he'd expected, with visible wear on the keys and a small photograph taped to the inside of the case. An elderly woman with Sophia's same warm smile, and a man who must have been her father, his arm around a younger Sophia who beamed while holding a music competition trophy. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Music is how we remember who we are when life tries to make us forget." Dean Harrison carefully zipped the case closed again, his decision forming. The next morning, Sophia was halfway through her American literature class when her phone vibrated with a text from Professor Langdon. "My office. After class. Important." She rushed across campus as soon as class ended, anxiety building with each step. Had something gone wrong with her music theory project? Was there a problem with her scholarship for next semester? Professor Langdon was waiting outside his office, a cryptic smile on his face. "Someone wants to speak with you," he said, gesturing inside. Sophia stepped through the doorway and froze. Dean Harrison stood by the window, her keyboard case propped against the wall beside him. "Miss Reyes," he said with a formal nod. "Please sit down." Sophia perched nervously on the edge of a chair, eyes fixed on her keyboard. "Am I in more trouble?" "No," Dean Harrison said, his tone softer than she'd heard before. "Quite the opposite, actually." He cleared his throat. "It seems I may have been overly rigid in my approach to your situation." Sophia glanced at Professor Langdon, who nodded encouragingly from the doorway. "The university's centennial celebration is in 2 weeks," Dean Harrison continued. "The committee has lost their pianist for the donor reception. Professor Langdon suggested you might be willing to step in." Sophia blinked in surprise. "You want me to play? Officially? With all proper permissions and paperwork, yes." The dean gestured to her keyboard. "And I believe you'll need this." Sophia moved to the keyboard, hands trembling slightly as she unzipped the case and ran her fingers over the familiar keys. "Thank you," she whispered. "There's more," Dean Harrison said. "The student committee has requested your composition, the one that seems to have captured everyone's attention, be featured in the opening ceremony." Sophia looked up, stunned. "My piece? At the centennial?" "It would need to be arranged for the university orchestra, of course. Professor Langdon has offered to help with that." "I don't understand," Sophia said carefully. "What changed?" Dean Harrison was quiet for a moment. "I've spent 20 years enforcing university policies, Miss Reyes. Sometimes I forget to look beyond the rules to see their purpose." He gestured to the window, where students crossed the quad below. "Your music did something extraordinary here. It created genuine community in a way that all our official programs and events never managed to achieve." He straightened his glasses, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional turn of the conversation. "The university's mission is to foster both academic excellence and meaningful human connections. Your courtyard gatherings accomplished the latter more effectively than anything I've seen in my tenure." Professor Langdon stepped forward. "We'd like to establish designated performance spaces around campus. Places where students can share music, poetry, art, with proper registration, of course," he added with a glance at the dean. "And," Dean Harrison continued, "we'd like you to help develop the guidelines. Someone who understands both the importance of structure and the value of creative expression." Sophia looked between them, a smile slowly spreading across her face. "I'd be honored. On one condition." "Yes?" Dean Harrison raised an eyebrow. "The first official designated performance space has to be the courtyard." For the first time since she'd met him, Dean Harrison smiled, a small but genuine expression that softened his entire face. "I believe that can be arranged." As Sophia left the office, keyboard case slung over her shoulder where it belonged, she stopped in the doorway. "Dean Harrison? Thank you for listening." He nodded, a thoughtful expression replacing his usual stern demeanor. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "we all need to hear a new melody." The 2 weeks before the centennial celebration passed in a blur of activity. Sophia divided her time between classes, rehearsals with the university orchestra, and meetings with Dean Harrison's newly formed Committee on Campus Performance Spaces. "We're thinking 6 designated areas," Dean Harrison explained during one meeting, pointing at a campus map spread across the conference table, each with different size capacities and scheduling priorities. "And proper sound equipment," Sophia suggested, growing more confident in these settings. "Maybe even a small covered area for rainy days." The dean nodded, making notes. "Reasonable additions. We'll need to adjust the budget accordingly." Professor Langdon caught Sophia's eye across the table, giving her an approving smile. The same administrator who had banned her music entirely was now implementing her suggestions for making performances more accessible to all students. Meanwhile, Sophia's original composition was being transformed into something grander than she'd ever imagined. The university's music department had arranged her melody for full orchestra, with Sophia's piano part at its center. Each rehearsal brought new goosebumps as she heard her personal piece expanded through violins, cellos, brass, and percussion. "How does it feel?" Professor Langdon asked after one particularly moving rehearsal. Sophia shook her head at a loss for words. "Like hearing my thoughts translated into a whole new language. Bigger than I ever thought they could be." The night before the centennial, Sophia returned to the courtyard, her courtyard, sitting alone on the bench where she'd first played months ago. Tomorrow it would become the first official designated performance space on campus, complete with a small sign bearing the name Community Circle. The name had been suggested by students who'd gathered there during her performances. "There you are." Sophia looked up to find Raj approaching, guitar case in hand. "Just needed some quiet," she explained. "Tomorrow's going to be intense." He sat beside her. "Nervous about playing for all those fancy donors?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But not just about that. It's more." She struggled to find the words. "When I first played here, I was just trying to earn money for textbooks. I never expected any of this." "That's usually how the best things happen," Raj said with a gentle smile. "We don't plan them. I just keep thinking about my dad," Sophia said quietly. "How he'd feel seeing all this. The scholarship they're creating, my music being played by a whole orchestra. He'd be proud," Raj said simply. How could he not be? They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Raj lifted his guitar. "One last underground performance before it all becomes official tomorrow?" Sophia smiled, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. "Why not?" Together they played her melody one final time as unofficial courtyard musicians, their music drifting across the empty campus under a canopy of stars. The morning of the centennial dawned bright and clear. The entire campus had been transformed with banners, flowers, and exhibits highlighting Westfield's 100-year history. Students in formal attire guided alumni and donors between buildings, while maintenance staff made last-minute adjustments to the outdoor stage, where the opening ceremony would take place. Sophia spent the morning in a practice room, running through her piece until Professor Langdon gently suggested she might wear out the keys before the actual performance. "You're more than ready," he assured her. "Take a break, have something to eat. I'll see you at the donor reception at 4. The reception was held in the university's Grand Hall, a space Sophia had passed many times but never entered. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ornate ceiling, illuminating elegant tables where Westfield's wealthiest supporters gathered in expensive clothes, sipping champagne and discussing donation amounts that made Sophia's head spin. At precisely 4:30, Dean Harrison approached the microphone set up beside the grand piano that had been brought in for the occasion. "Distinguished guests, esteemed faculty and friends of Westfield University," he began. "Today we celebrate a century of academic excellence and community impact. It is my pleasure to introduce a student whose music has recently created an extraordinary sense of unity on our campus. Please welcome Sophia Reyes." The applause was polite as Sophia crossed to the piano, her hands trembling slightly as she settled onto the bench. She took a deep breath, fingers hovering over the keys, and began to play. For the donor reception, she'd prepared a classical program highlighting composers throughout history. As she played, Sophia lost herself in the music, barely noticing as the polite attention of the crowd transformed into genuine appreciation. By the time she finished her final piece, a complex Chopin nocturne that had been her father's favorite, The applause had grown warm and enthusiastic. Dean Harrison returned to the microphone, genuine appreciation in his voice. What Ms. Reyes didn't mention is that she is also a talented composer. Tomorrow at the opening ceremony, the University Orchestra will premiere her original composition, which has already become something of an unofficial anthem for our students. More applause followed, and then Sophia found herself surrounded by donors asking about her background, her studies, her musical inspirations. One elderly woman with kind eyes took her hand. "My late husband was a pianist. I haven't heard playing with that much heart in years." Before Sophia could respond, Professor Langdon appeared at her side. "I apologize for interrupting, but Ms. Flores from the Westfield Foundation would like to speak with Sophia." He guided her toward a corner where a sharp-eyed woman in a tailored suit waited. "Ms. Reyes," she greeted Sophia with a firm handshake. "I'm the director of the Westfield Foundation's Arts Initiative. Dean Harrison shared your story with me, including your background with Richardson Conservatory." Sophia glanced at the dean, who stood nearby in conversation with other donors. He caught her eye and nodded slightly. "We're establishing a new scholarship," Ms. Flores continued, "for musically gifted students facing financial hardship. Full tuition, plus a stipend for instrument maintenance and professional development. We'd like to name it after you." "After me?" Sophia echoed, stunned. "The Sophia Reyes Community Arts Scholarship," Ms. Flores confirmed. "And we'd like you to help select the first recipient next fall." Sophia struggled to find words. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Ms. Flores smiled. "And keep playing. Talent like yours, combined with the kind of community building you've inspired, deserves support." The next morning arrived with perfect weather for the outdoor opening ceremony. Hundreds of chairs had been arranged on the main lawn, facing a stage where the university orchestra warmed up. Sophia peeked from behind the curtained area, amazed at the crowd gathering, students, faculty, alumni, and community members filling every seat, with more standing along the edges. In the front row sat her mother, who had arrived late the previous night after Sophia had called with the scholarship news. Beside her were Raj, Priya, and other students who had been regular listeners in the courtyard days. Even the cafeteria manager had come, waving when he spotted Sophia peering out. Professor Langdon approached, orchestra baton in hand. "Ready for your debut, Ms. Reyes?" Sophia nodded, butterflies dancing in her stomach. "Remember," he said gently, "just like in the courtyard, play from your heart, and they'll hear it." When Dean Harrison introduced her to the crowd, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Nothing like the polite reception of yesterday's donor event. These were people who knew her story, who had hummed her melody in hallways and classrooms, who had helped her music echo across campus despite the ban. Sophia took her place at the piano, nodding to Professor Langdon, who raised his baton. The orchestra began the introduction, her simple melody now transformed into a rich tapestry of sound. When Sophia's part entered, her fingers found the familiar notes with ease, her personal story flowing through the music. As they played, Sophia noticed something extraordinary happening. Students in the audience began softly humming along. Then faculty members joined in. Even some alumni who had heard about the courtyard melody through campus newsletters added their voices. By the final movement, hundreds of voices had joined the orchestra in an unplanned but perfect harmony. Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she played the last triumphant chords, her private composition now truly belonging to the entire Westfield community. The applause that followed seemed endless. When it finally quieted, Dean Harrison approached the microphone again, seeming moved despite his usual reserved demeanor. "In 100 years of Westfield history," he said, "we have celebrated many achievements. Today we add a new one, the recognition that our greatest strength lies not just in academic excellence, but in our capacity to build community through shared experiences." He gestured toward the courtyard visible from the ceremony space. "As part of our centennial legacy, I'm pleased to announce the dedication of our first official campus performance space, Community Circle, and the establishment of 6 additional spaces across campus where students can share their talents freely, bringing us together through music, poetry, theater, and art." More applause erupted, especially from the students who understood the significance of this announcement. Sometimes, Dean Harrison continued with a small smile. It takes a melody to remind us of our purpose. And sometimes it takes a determined young pianist to show us that rules work best when they serve the community, rather than simply govern it. After the ceremony, Sophia found herself surrounded by well-wishers, including many students she'd never met who had been touched by her music. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering how proud her father would have been. As the crowd began to disperse, Dean Harrison approached, extending his hand. "Congratulations, Ms. Reyes, your performance was extraordinary." "Thank you," Sophia said, shaking his hand. "For everything." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Your melody will continue echoing through this campus long after today's celebration ends." "That's the thing about music," Sophia replied with a smile. "Once it's shared, it belongs to everyone who hears it." 3 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Sophia sat on the new permanent bench installed in Community Circle, watching as a freshman guitar player entertained a small crowd of students. Nearby, a sign displayed the weekly schedule of approved performances, with time slots filled for months in advance. From her bag, Sophia pulled a letter that had arrived that morning. Official notification of her acceptance into Westfield's prestigious dual-degree program in music composition and education, fully funded by her newly established scholarship. As the young guitarist finished his song, Sophia joined in the applause, remembering her own first days playing in this space. The melody that had once been silenced now lived on through new voices, new instruments, new students finding their place in the Westfield community. The entitled dean who had prohibited the street pianist had indeed learned something valuable. That sometimes the most important lessons come not from enforcing rules, but from listening to the unexpected melodies that emerge when rules bend to serve a greater purpose. And Sophia's melody continued to echo through the entire campus, bringing harmony to places where once there had been only silence.